Welcome to the People's Forum.
We are demanding recoupment. Recoupment of our birthright with compound interest over the years of oppression and exploitation. We're demanding recoupment of earnings that were never paid. The initial demand of this recoupment is, as a start, $6 billion. $6 billion for the creation of a black urban coalition.
Welcome back, America. We're here with part 2 of the reparations argument. We still have our esteemed guests, Mr. Robert Hornak, Dr. Stacie N.C. Grant, Mr. Royce Russell. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to pick up with some of these arguments. And what I'm going to throw out there is, what about the argument that blacks don't work hard enough? They haven't been working as hard as many other immigrant groups that have come to this country. Who wants to answer that?
I want to jump in on that one, that blacks don't work hard. We built the country. So I don't know how much harder you can work with blood, sweat, and tears. What we don't talk about is the fact that our labor hasn't been able to be quantified properly with what we're able to earn, what positions we can go after as a result of education, as a result of exposure. At the dinner table where certain communities talk about portfolios and investment opportunities, the black family is talking about making it to the next day because they don't have the foundation of resources for owning a home, that they can have equity in a home that can help them position for a portfolio that they can create, and that the kids are talking about entrepreneurial ideas. The different conversations haven't happened because the labor has been so intensive in our community. It causes a disconnect with what we're able to do and how we're able to work, and the mental damage that was done as a result of slavery. If you tell someone they're inferior long enough, they might start believing it, and not realizing that the work and the labor that they've contributed to this country should be compensated in a way that generations can be able to now look back and say, well, we suffered, but as a result of the advocacy and the conversations and the information and opening up dialogue, we can now gain some sort of reparation for the damage that was done to us, and that people don't look at us as if we can't work, we don't want to work, we're lazy, and all the things that come out as a result of the systematic way we have been demoralized as a people.
I know for a fact back in 1840, African-American slaves made up 59% of the income in America. I can't imagine that number has decreased. I can only imagine that number has increased when you talk about the Industrial Revolution, when you talk about indentured servitude, when you talk about prison camps. I mean, people fail to realize that
at the bottom of the Industrial Revolution was what? Cotton.
Cotton, right?
Cotton.
Correct.
The number one crop here in America, the number 2 crop being tobacco, the number 3 crop being sugar, all the way down to the South America. Those 3 crops, based on slave labor and physical manual labor, was all based on black folks.
These are not easy issues to discuss. Nobody wants to be in the position where they're disagreeing and they're labeled as racist. That's a really uncomfortable position for people to be in. And clearly, I'll never know what it's like to be black in America. Well, what I do know is that I have experienced certain degrees of racism. My people were the original slaves, were the Jews. And you're making a funny face. Jews weren't slaves before?
Well, there's some historical inaccuracies. I've done a lot. I've done a lot of research.
Okay.
I'm I'm gonna let Dr. Grant. No, just listen. You're talking about a biblical reference, and I don't have the credentials. I will let Dr. Grant answer that.
But just give me 30 more seconds, because that wasn't my point. My point is this. I've experienced what it's like to be discriminated against in this country for being Jewish. Jews are pretty much the lowest rung when you're racist. Everybody always gets around to hating the Jews eventually.
I have a question. I mean, while you're on that, and I mean this with the deepest and the most open of heart. If you do not tell me that you're a member of the Jewish community, if you do not tell me you're a Catholic, if you do not tell, stop, if you do not tell me you are a Muslim, how would I know?
No, there are deeper problems here.
No, I need you to answer that. If you do not tell me you're a Jewish person, a Catholic, or a Muslim, how would I know?
Well, in many cases, by the way you dress, by the way you carry yourself.
If you're not part of the Hasidim or the Orthodox movement, and you don't have Pesas, yarmulke, nothing, if you're just dressed as a Gentile, how would I know?
Conservative and Orthodox Jews are large numbers. They all wear yarmulkes.
I said if you didn't wear it. If you were not in...
I answered your question in the beginning. You would know.
You wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know.
How would you know an African American?
It's very obvious.
How?
By the color of your skin.
Okay, I'll stop. Dr. Grant?
So I want to go back to what you just said, that Jews are the lowest rung and, first slaves, the original slaves. So I'm a little bit confused with the notion that we can compare the transatlantic slave trade to what Jews went through, an atrocity, and did not they get reparation for the damage
No.
that was done?
No.
They did too. They did too. They did too.
So I'm really baffled at that point because
Robert, I'm going to let you answer that again. Maybe you didn't hear the question. I think you didn't hear the question.
I heard the
did
question.
not the Jewish community
Oh, without a question.
get reparations
Yes.
for the horrific atrocity that community suffered? Yes or no?
You're talking about slavery or you're talking about World War II?
Let's start with slavery
No.
and World War II. No.
With World War II, they got a little patch of dirt in the Middle East, which they're still fighting to maintain.
And if I told you we have no patch on the dirt, wouldn't that amount to something?
You've got this entire country.
How do
We own less than 2%. Oh, stop. We own less than 2% of U.S. wealth. The 2% number is a reoccurring theme in the Black America, because we're generally 2% of everything until we get to incarceration. See, when we get to incarceration, all of a sudden we're 51% of the incarcerated number as Black men.
Well, Robin, let me have you define when you say we have this country.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? We have this country.
You are Americans. You're part of the society. Do you suffer racism? Absolutely. I'm not disputing that. These are issues that we need to grapple with very sincerely and try to find solutions.
So
they're not easy.
But what I'm trying, what I think you're answering is not necessarily the question that I'm proposing. The question is that we know that the Jewish community, based upon the Holocaust and based upon what has happened to them, even though you describe it as a patch of dirt, they received something, right? Then what you translate that into, when I say African Americans, what did we receive? You say we received the whole country. And now we didn't receive the whole country. As we sit here today, we don't have the whole country to our disposal.
Everything
We're
was
not
extracted.
the king and the queens of this land. We know that we haven't received anything. And not to say that as an eye for an eye, but even the conversation that we should receive something is has such a visceral effect on people that I don't understand. And the only thing that I can relate it to, because it's not resources, because we could print money anytime we want to. And it's not, and it's not who's going to pay, because we know it's not coming out of individuals' pockets where we're knocking on the door. It is the sense of America didn't do anything wrong. Like, what are you talking about? Repay you? Repay you for what? You worked. You made America great. Therefore, you were great. Wink, wink. What do we owe you? And that formula is really the problem, because we're not talking about whether a wrong was done. We agree a wrong was done. We're not talking about whether racism exists. We agree racism exists. So what are we talking about?
We're talking.
Well, that's a good question, because we had alluded earlier, in, I believe, the prior segment, to the fact that racism has been, or I'm sorry, slavery has been an institution that goes back hundreds and thousands of years.
No, we're dealing with American chattel slavery. We're not going. No, stop, Robert.
Yes?
I'm going to frame this because context is very.
I'm going to frame it
but
in 5 seconds for you.
Context.
I'm going to frame it in 5 seconds
Just 1 second.
for you.
1 second.
Okay.
Context. We're dealing with American
Yes.
chattel slavery. We're not going into the Bible. Go ahead.
No, the point is this. We inherited as a country, this country hasn't been around for 500 years. This country's been around since 1789. We've been around for a little over almost 250 years. We inherited slavery.
There
we
was
had states that
there
were
was
members.
slavery every step of the way, and then after it was repealed, another 150 years of Jim Crow.
Domestic slavery went up. The slave trade stopped, and then domestic slavery was a major uptick.
We
And
were bred like cattle.
if we just start with domestic slavery in the United States, we still don't get to the answer to the question of, we know it was wrong, we know racism exists, we know on the backs of African Americans this country was built. Why do we have a problem repaying those?
And let's build on that. To your point, you said we have the country and we can do. So here is my challenge. How can we do when you look at, let's take our Jewish brothers and sisters who have been able to purchase property, who own, let's just use New York, how many different pieces of infrastructure within this state because they had opportunity to be able to go and purchase and get. Where was the same opportunities given to African Americans to be able to purchase the same amount of real estate? There are people who are independently wealthy right in the state of New York, built on real estate and being able to own. We haven't had the same opportunities because when loans were given out, they weren't given to people who look like me. But no one would know necessarily if someone was a Jew or someone was Gentile or someone was Irish Catholic just by the way they look, but immediately we are categorized and put in boxes that limit our access to the same things that another community has been able to build generational wealth from.
So wait. So early on we spoke about redlining, and that happened in the early 1970s, 60s, and things of that nature.
Starting from the 30s.
30s. We 1930s to 1960s. Now we fast forward. And we go all the way to 2010. I'm going to read because I like facts, right? Because an opinion is not worth anything unless you have facts. Lawsuit against Wells Fargo started in 2005, ended in 2010, where they referred to customers of African American skin as mud people and began to give them loans that they know that they will falter on. Predatory lending, extreme high interest. That is the institutionalized racism that we're talking about that began to disenfranchise, displace, put at a disadvantage, not be able to create wealth of African Americans that is a direct derivative of slavery, and you work your way up.
The number one asset of the average American is the family home. That is something that we were locked out of systematically by the government for a period of 150 years after slavery. There's no way to get away from that. We were not allowed to vote until 1954. Not allowed to vote. So we couldn't take part in this great democracy that we were going overseas fighting for. African Americans fighting in every single war. Every single war they fought in and did not even have the privilege to vote. We have 1 minute before we go to break. Robert, you take that 1 minute.
Kwame, you can sit here and list off all of the institutional forms of racism that have happened in the last 150 years. I will not dispute that. Look, as a Republican, I've spoken on this issue publicly for years, that there's been massive institutional racism in this country against African Americans, and it needs to be overcome. There needs to be solutions to change people's lives, and we've discussed many different ways to begin that process. If maybe what you're talking about as reparations is what we think of as other economic types of benefits. And there's a conversation that can be had there. But when you come at me and you say, I want reparations and I'm going to make it hurt and it's going to hurt you.
See,
That's
see,
going to
see,
make
Robert,
anybody like
see, now,
me.
now you
That's
take it.
make
Now
anybody
you are
Okay,
taking a
what-
statement.
okay.
You are taking a statement.
Okay,
and-
Royce, we're getting ready
Yes,
to go to break.
please,
When we come back,
please.
we'll let you answer. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Do we have-
Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why did the girl ask the mushroom to dance? Because he was a fun guy. What do you call a pig that knows karate? Pork chop. So how does a tissue dance? Put a little boogie on it.
Counselor, please pick up where you left off.
So I just want to make sure that we don't take a sentence and try to have that be the blanket of our discussion. And so we were talking about reparations, and I made a statement that it should hurt. And I just want to make sure that we understand what I mean by that and where it's coming from. Nobody likes to pay money. Nobody likes to pay money. America does not like to pay money. So any thought of paying any type of money is going to hurt. And if it didn't hurt, then America would have paid for it a long time ago. There's something about slavery, using free labor, discriminatory practices over centuries, raping of women, terrorism of men, forecasting where the children would then wind up going to prison, that America does not want to face. And that's where the hurt begins. And that's where the hurt ends, in that cannot look at themselves in the face and say, we created this. We started this. We're the forefathers of this. Now, what can we do to stop it? How can we play a role to end it? We, as Americans, we have no problem saying, Germany, you do this. Haiti, you do that. Britain, you do
We're
this.
the policemen of the world. We're fighting for
But
democracy all over the world.
themselves is a problem. And I use hurt because, as you said, I'm a civil rights attorney, right? I practice in the area of unlawful arrest, police brutality. I know that in this sphere, in this area of law, that the police union fight utmost against police officers having a financial stake in the settlement if a case goes to trial or if a case is settled and it comes out that they participated in some
It is
misconduct.
called indemnification.
They don't want, when you start saying, hey, look, part of this is going to come from your paycheck, oh my God. Don't want anything to do with it. Financial responsibility is the biggest responsibility and the biggest consequence and the biggest broom switch, anything in the room.
Skin in the game.
That will
No,
cause
absolutely.
you, that will cause you to hesitate, to pause. So, yes, skin in the game.
Skin in the game.
I'm sorry, please.
I'm just going to add to
ahead.
that in addition to what Mr. Russell has just shared, it's not profitable to acknowledge the truth. It's more profitable to build for-profit prison institutions than to invest in the education of equity and resources for disenfranchised people. We
Okay,
make
let
more
me-
money
I gotta make a
doing
point.
that than we do with what would be the best way forward with having the conversation move past reparations and actual actions that can help bring equity across the board. But it's more profitable to keep us in prison for the labor because that labor is still slave labor that is producing billions of dollars in the pockets of just a few individuals in the
Well,
country.
there are reforms there we could certainly discuss, but I think that's a different show. But look,
No, hold on, because
I have
education.
a really important point I want to make here.
Go ahead.
And I think I want you to hear me out because I
ahead.
know you're going to react before the words all finish coming out of my mouth.
Nope.
Okay. Now, some people would say that you've already received your reparations through the form of the social welfare system that we've had for the last 40 years and all the trillions of dollars that have flowed into that. I would say no. That system has been an abject failure, and that if we took some of that money and redirect, look, there's a lot of things that could be done. We were discussing some things, I think, off the air about school vouchers, about private. I don't think I got into privatizing public housing, but that's one. Privatizing retirement programs and funding them, which would not be something which would be
Tax exemptions.
with tax exemptions. There's a whole lot of ways. It's ultimately. This problem is going to be addressed or not addressed in the way it is presented. And when you present it as something that's going to be divisive on its surface, people are going to recoil and back away from it. But look, a lot of people like me
I don't even think we get. I don't even think we get. I don't think we get to the point where people can say. I don't see, Robert. I know your heart is in the right place, but I think what happens is that you catapult to the part that's going to split people away. We don't even get to there. Before we can get to there, we're splitting people away. Is admitting that it happened. That's the problem. That's the problem because without admission, you can't get to recovery.
What kind of admission are you looking at? I think.
What we start off the show with?
You
we
sound like Mitch McConnell.
start off the show with Rich
Bernie-
say,
like-
he
no,
says,
no, no,
he
hold
says,
on. You sound
hey,
like Bernie Sanders.
this is happening.
What are you talking about?
This
Reparations.
happened
What do you mean by
150
reparations?
years ago.
Yeah.
We don't even know who we can translate to find out who's what, whatever. He did not start out the statement with, I am sorry this has happened. Anytime you talk about the Holocaust, anytime you talk about anything that has to do with the Jews and the suffering they went through, first things out of, I'm sorry. When it comes down to black folks,
I don't hear a whole lot of sorries.
on the level that we're talking about.
Let me say
On
something.
the
Let me
level
say
that
something. Let
we're
me say
talking
something.
about
And,
here.
and we learn about the atrocity in depth when we are educated in this country. We learn about it. It was systematically put into curriculum so that no one could forget. And I admire that about our Jewish family, that is part of your mantra every day, never forget.
That's actually the point I was trying to ultimately come around to when I brought that up earlier, is that I am all for education. People should understand the history of this country and the history of this world, how we got to where we are. I think it's very, very important.
Can I say something? Because I want to move to another argument.
Yeah.
As fundamental as education is, it is not what defines the wealth gap between blacks and whites.
I disagree with you.
Well, the statistics, it's not me.
Right, right,
This
right.
is not me. This is not about Kwame Innis. This has to deal with what the statistics bear out.
How could the statistics bear out that in the black community, people are failing school at a miserable rate? We're not educating people. We're not
But
preparing
why?
them to go to
Ask
college.
yourself the question, why? Why?
Because we don't put the resources into those schools.
What else? What else? What other reason?
Look,
There's no resources in the schools. What else?
Look, I think because of the teachers' contracts, they get some of the worst teachers. I think they get the worst.
Are the teachers black?
No.
Okay.
I don't
So
know.
what else? What other reasons?
I don't know what the teachers are. I think it depends on
But
the
because
on the
okay,
area.
we can use New York City school system. The average teacher in New York City school system is not black.
No.
The average student is, however.
Yes.
Okay. So when we're talking about money spent on students, whether you compare New York to a place like South Carolina or Texas or Georgia, different municipalities spend different amounts of money, but there's a common theme. the black kids in the poor areas get the least amount of money spent on them. They come into school unable to read. By the 3rd grade, they're tracked into these programs. And before high school, they're in juvenile detention centers and being prepared for prison. Like Dr. Grant said, the for-profit prison system is only another form of slavery.
You like to ask me questions? Let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Who controls all that money that goes?
The United States of America, the government.
No, that's all done at the local level.
No. Wait. Hold on. So what you're saying is this is the feds versus the state. The feds kick it back to the state. That's a state's rights issue. Or that's a local issue. Guess what?
The money still goes where the money goes.
Ultimately, the federal government is in charge of everything, ultimately.
It's not supposed to be.
What I don't want, but that's the way it is. What I don't want to happen is I don't want to skirt over the welfare comment that you made, because there's some people in my family that have taken care of their children, educated their children, sent their children off to school or to different private industries, and their children are doing well in this country based on public housing and public funds. So I'm not going to villainize anybody for growing up in that condition. But I will not let you lay that at the feet of black people, because they're not the #1 recipients of it.
Exactly.
No, they're not.
Okay. I need to ask a question. We have 3 minutes left. This is the bootstrap question. This is a Republican stronghold. This is the bootstrap question. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Other people have done it. We got a minute to each one of you. Let's go.
You want me to start with that one?
Sure, Robert.
Look, the bootstrap argument only goes so far. I'll admit that.
The great Ronald Reagan started that. Come on.
Well, I think actually it was Clarence Thomas I first heard it from, but
Ronald Reagan.
Was it Ronald Reagan? Okay, I stand corrected. Look, there are historic injustices that have been done. There's institutional racism in this country. There are many things that we can do to overcome those historic injustices if we sit down and have an honest conversation about what can be done, what we're willing to do, how much it's going to cost, how we're going to implement the programs, how we're going to shift the money from one place to another to pay for it. Things can be done, absolutely, and they should be. They must be.
Dr. Grant?
I don't know how you can bootstrap if you don't even own the boots.
Exactly.
So that's where I have a fundamental issue with that
We'll give them the
argument.
boots.
It's more than just giving. It's the acknowledgement of the training that needs to be done. And I feel that we are in denial as a country what it really takes to be able to bring us to a place where we can have the real conversation about what has happened and where we are now and how we can move the needle forward, given not just conversation, but actual money and financing to put us in a position where we can create wealth the same way that other communities have created it, and to be able to have intergenerational wealth start to self-correct after the years that we've suffered. It's not an overnight process. We can't solve it all in one people's forum, but we can begin to acknowledge the fact that the boots didn't exist, that there is a problem.
I have no comment.
Well, all right. Let me just follow it up. And I agree. We are in denial. We live here in a city, New York City, where our local government is most definitely in denial.
Okay, the show has to end. It was a fantastic season. Thank you all for coming. People's Forum, we'll be back at you next year. This was Reparations.